Most people dread coming home to an empty house. I came home to a full one, and I have never been more terrified in my life. Welcome back to Silver Verdict. Get yourself a cuppa, settle in, and remember every person in this story had a choice. They just made the wrong one. Leave a comment below and subscribe if you haven't already. You're going to want to stick around for this one. Let me tell you something about being married for 31 years. After 3 decades of sharing a kitchen, a mortgage, and every single opinion your wife has ever formed about the correct way to stack a dishwasher, and trust me, there is apparently a correct way, and I have never once discovered it. You develop something that goes beyond knowing a person. You develop a kind of radar, a quiet internal signal that fires when something in your world has shifted without your permission. I felt that signal the moment I turned into our driveway on a Wednesday afternoon in late autumn. My name is Graham. I am 63 years old. I spent 32 years working in civil engineering, retired 2 years ago, and have spent the bulk of my retirement trying to convince my wife Margaret that a man is allowed to sit in his own garden without a project attached to him. Margaret, for the record, has never once agreed with this position. She is 61, sharp as a tack, and has an opinion about everything from local council decisions to the precise ripeness of an avocado. She is also, without question, the reason our home has functioned at all for the past 3 decades. I had been in Wellington for 4 days. A former colleague had asked me to consult on a roading project, nothing demanding, just reviewing some documents and sitting through a few meetings. The kind of work that reminds you why you retired in the first place. The final meeting was canceled Wednesday morning due to a scheduling conflict, and rather than sit in a hotel room watching the news, I booked an earlier flight back to Christchurch, rang nobody, and decided I would surprise Margaret. Maybe pick up a decent bottle of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc on the way home. Maybe actually eat dinner before 8 o'clock for once. The first thing I noticed was my son-in-law's ute in the driveway. Brendan is married to our daughter Stacey. He is 34, works in property development, and has the particular quality of a man who is always slightly too comfortable in rooms that belong to other people. Seeing his ute at my house on a Wednesday afternoon was not impossible. But it felt wrong, the way a sound feels wrong at 3 in the morning. Technically ordinary, contextually alarming. I sat in the car for a moment and said to no one in particular, "What are you doing here, Brendan?" Not a question. A statement. The kind your gut makes before your brain has caught up. I pulled my bag from the boot and walked to the front door. I didn't knock. It's my house. I haven't knocked in 30 years, and I pushed it open. Stacey and Brendan were in the lounge. Stacey was on the couch with her phone face down on her knee. Brendan was standing near the window with his arms crossed, wearing an expression I can only describe as a man who had rehearsed this moment and was now discovering the rehearsal hadn't been enough. Here is the detail I need you to hold on to, because it matters more than anything else I am about to tell you. Stacey looked up when I walked in, and she was not surprised. My daughter, who knew I was supposed to be in Wellington until Thursday, looked at me walking through the front door a full day early, and her face did not change. No sharp intake of breath. "No, Dad. What are you doing home?" Nothing. Just a very brief, very controlled stillness. The kind that comes from someone who has already decided what to say next. Brendan said, "Graham." I set my bag down slowly. "Were you?" "Mum had a bit of a turn this morning," Stacey said. Her voice was even, practiced. "She's at Christchurch Hospital. They're saying she's stable." I don't remember getting back to the car. I remember being in it, reversing out of the driveway, and the strange mechanical way my hands were operating the steering wheel while the rest of me was somewhere far behind, still standing in the lounge trying to understand what I had seen on my daughter's face. I called my brother-in-law Derek on the way. Derek is Margaret's younger brother, 60 years old, a retired detective sergeant who spent 26 years with the New Zealand police and a man who has never once told me what I wanted to hear when what I needed was the truth. I have loved him for exactly that reason since 1994. He picked up on the second ring. Graham. What's up, mate? Margaret's in hospital. Christchurch. I just got home early from Wellington, and Stacey and Brendan were sitting in my lounge like they'd been waiting for something. A pause. What do you mean, waiting? Derek. My daughter didn't react when I walked in. I was supposed to be away until tomorrow. She didn't react. There seems semesity, for use them Bessie, for use the more. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, very carefully, how far away are you from the hospital? 10 minutes. Drive the speed limit, he said. That's not a suggestion. I made it in 8. I will not be elaborating on that. The nurse at the front desk directed me to the ward. A doctor met me in the corridor. Dr. Priya Sharma, early 40s. Calm in the way that people become calm when delivering difficult news is part of the job. She shook my hand and walked with me away from the desk, which I noticed. People who are about to tell you something straightforward don't walk you away first. Mr. Alderton, she said. I'm glad you've come in. Margaret was brought here this morning by your daughter. She presented with severe confusion, some cardiac irregularity, and her blood work has returned some markers that concern us. What kind of markers? She met my eyes steadily. Elevated levels, consistent with toxic exposure. We're running a full panel. But I want to be honest with you. The presentation is not consistent with something acute. The pattern suggests accumulation over time. I heard the word accumulation, and the corridor seemed to tilt slightly. Dr. Sharma, I said, and I kept my voice as level as I could manage. Are you telling me that someone may have been doing something to my wife deliberately? She held my gaze. I'm telling you we need more answers, and that you are right to be asking the question. I went in to see Margaret. I have known that woman for 34 years. I have seen her in every state a human being can occupy. I have seen her exhausted after childbirth and exhilarated finishing her half marathon at 58. I have seen her furious enough to reduce a local counselor to a stammering apology at a public meeting, and soft enough to sit on the floor of our granddaughter's bedroom at midnight, reading the same picture book 4 times in a row without complaint. I was not prepared for what I walked into. She looked diminished. That is the only word for it. Like something essential had been slowly drawn out of her. The way color drains from a photograph left too long in the sun. The machines beeped their steady, indifferent rhythms. An IV line ran from her arm, and Margaret, who once rerouted our entire landscaping plan because she decided the garden needed better energy flow, lay in that bed looking impossibly fragile. I sat beside her and took her hand. She didn't wake. I made her a promise. I am not a man who makes them lightly ask anyone who has ever worked for me or waited on one from me. I told her quietly that I was there, that I was not going anywhere, and that I was going to find out exactly what had happened to her. Then I walked back out to the waiting area. Stacey and Brendan had arrived. Stacey stood up when she saw me. Dad, how is she? Stable, I said. Brendan said, we can drive you home later, if you need. I won't need that, I said. Something in the way I said it stopped him. I watched Stacey's eyes move across my face quickly, the way they used to when she was a teenager calculating how much I already knew about something she'd done. I said, Stacey, which medications has your mother been taking lately? She blinked. Just her usual ones. Her blood pressure tablet, her vitamin D, and the supplements, Brendan said. Smoothly, too smoothly. We've been helping her with those. Which supplements? I said. Brendan opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Stacey. Stacey looked at her phone, which was face down again. That 3-second exchange was all I needed. I'd like you both to go home, I said. Dad, Stacey. One word. Her name. Once. The way my own father used to say mine, when I had run out of options. Go home. They left. I found a chair in the corner of the waiting area, and I did not call Derek immediately, as much as I wanted to. Instead, I sat with a cup of terrible hospital tea, and I started doing what engineers do when something has gone wrong. I opened every bank account on my phone. Margaret and I had 3, a joint everyday account, a joint savings, and one I had set up 4 years ago for household expenses that, at Stacey's suggestion after we'd had some plumbing work done, had been made accessible to her for what we called family emergencies. At the time, it had seemed reasonable. Stacey was organized, responsible, and we were not getting any younger. That is what I had told myself. I went through 6 months of statements. I am not an accountant. I am a civil engineer who retired without ever mastering the television remote. But even I could see that the household account had been consistently lighter than it should have been. Small transfers, $40 here, $200 there, once $350 on a Tuesday with no description. On their own, they meant nothing. Added together, across 5 months, we were looking at just over $9,000. $9,000. From an account my daughter had access to for emergencies. I called Derek at midnight. He answered, as though he'd been awake. 9,000. I said, without preamble. A pause. From which account? The household expense account. Stacey had emergency access. Small amounts. Consistent over 5 months. Derek was quiet. Then, Graham, that's not opportunistic. That's deliberate. That's someone who understood exactly how to move money without triggering a review. I said, my daughter. And I'll be honest with you. Those 2 words nearly took the legs from under me right there in that waiting area at midnight. We don't know everything yet, Derek said, carefully. But I need you to do nothing. Don't confront them. Don't move any accounts yet. Don't tip them off. Derek, I know, he said. I know what you know. Give me until morning. Doctor, Sharma found me at 7 the next morning, still in the waiting area, looking, she told me gently, like a man who had been arguing with the universe and lost several rounds. She sat down beside me the second time a doctor had sat down beside me in 2 days, and I was beginning to understand what that meant. She said, Mr. Alderton, the full panel results are back. Tell me straight, Margaret has elevated levels of a compound consistent with prolonged exposure to a cardiac glycoside. Not a prescription medication she's been given. Something introduced from outside, over a sustained period. Her heart has been under significant stress. The concentrations in her system suggest months of low-level exposure, gradually increasing. She paused. We caught it. Her prognosis is good. But I want you to understand how serious this is, I said. If someone were introducing this deliberately, how would they do it? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, it could be administered through food, through tea, through a supplement. Many cardiac glycosides are derived from common plants. In powdered or concentrated form, they can be incorporated into something without taste or obvious odor. I thought about Brendan's voice the previous afternoon. We've been helping her with those. The supplements. I stood up, thanked Dr. Sharma, walked to the window. Then I called a solicitor. Then I called the bank and had every account restructured, all access removed from Stacey and Brendan's profiles, and new credentials set up through the solicitor. Within 30 minutes, my phone was ringing. Stacey, 3 times. Brendan, twice. Then a text from Stacey that said, Dad, what's happened to the account? Brendan can't access anything. Please call me back. I sat with that message for a long time. This was a young woman I had walked to school for 6 years. A young woman I had driven to netball practice and waited in the car park afterwards in the rain. A woman who had stood at the front of a church 5 years ago and told 120 people that her parents were her foundation, that she was the person she was because of us. I had cried at that speech. I had properly, embarrassingly cried. I typed back 4 words. I know what happened. Then I put the phone in my pocket and went back up to sit with my wife, because she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Derek called at 8:10 that morning. He didn't say good morning. He said, "Graham, you need to sit down." I was already sitting. "Tell me." 3 months before Margaret ended up in that hospital bed, she had made an appointment with a financial advisor in Riccarton that neither I nor Stacey knew about. Margaret had, quietly and without telling anyone, been reassessing our estate plan. The existing arrangement had Stacey as the primary beneficiary of the bulk of our assets, our home, our investment property in Nelson, and a superannuation account that, with accumulated growth, was now worth approximately $1.8 million. Margaret had gone to that meeting, intending to restructure. She had been building something, a charitable trust oriented toward early literacy programs in low-decile schools, something she'd been researching for 2 years and had mentioned to me only in passing as a vague ambition. She had wanted to present it to me as a functioning thing. That was Margaret. She never showed you the sketch. She showed you the finished building. The restructure would have reduced Stacey's inheritance substantially. Not eliminated, Margaret wasn't cutting her out entirely. But the bulk of the estate, under the new plan, would go to the trust. Stacey had found out. Derek didn't yet know how, but she had found out. And she and Brendan had sat down together and decided that the most efficient solution was to ensure Margaret did not live long enough to complete the paperwork. The estate advisor had a processing window. Margaret had made the appointment to finalize in 6 weeks. She collapsed with 4 weeks remaining. I sat with that information in a plastic hospital chair for a very long time. I want to tell you what that feels like. Learning that your child, the person you drove to netball practice, the person you cried over at her wedding, looked at a spreadsheet, looked at her mother, and chose the spreadsheet. I don't think there is an adequate description. It is not grief exactly, though grief is in there. It is not rage, though that is in there too. It is something closer to a profound disorientation, like discovering that a load-bearing wall you have trusted for 30 years is hollow. You are not only looking at the damage, you are reconsidering everything you thought you understood about the structure. I did not allow myself to stay in that place for long. I called a lawyer, a woman named Caroline Tate, who had practiced family and criminal law in Canterbury for 25 years and had the polite, immovable quality of someone who has heard every version of every story and is no longer surprised by any of them. I told her everything. The account, withdrawals, the supplements, the timing of the estate restructure, the hospital results, all of it. She was quiet for a full 5 seconds. Then she said, "Graham, I need you to not touch the house. Don't move anything. Don't speak to either of them directly. Don't post anything. Don't message anything beyond what you've already sent. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. "Good. Because when we move on this, I want it to land cleanly. No gaps. No room to maneuver." I said, "Caroline, I want them to understand the full weight of what they did." She said, "By the time this is finished, they'll understand it in considerable detail." The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. Margaret was improving. Dr. Sharma was cautiously optimistic. The treatment was working. Her cardiac function was stabilizing. And on the second afternoon, I was sitting beside her bed reading a 2-week-old copy of a magazine I'd found in the waiting room, and I heard a voice from the pillow that was unquestionably, unmistakably hers. "Graham, you look absolutely dreadful." I put the magazine down. She was looking at me with one eye fully open and the other at approximately half capacity, in the specific expression she reserves for situations she finds both concerning and faintly ridiculous. I said, "You're in a hospital bed and you're critiquing my appearance." She said, very quietly, but very distinctly, "Someone has to maintain standards." I laughed. I laughed out loud in a hospital room, in a way that made a passing nurse pause in the doorway and reconsider me briefly. Maybe I had lost my mind, but the particular quality of that voice, dry, affectionate, ruthlessly observant, entirely, Margaret felt like something coming back to life. Not just her, something in me too. I took her hand. I held it for a long time, without speaking. I didn't tell her everything that day. She needed to recover first. But I told her she was safe. I told her that I knew what had happened. I told her that everything was being handled and that she had nothing to worry about. She looked at me for a long moment. Margaret has always looked at me like she is reading something I've written and checking it for errors. She has been right to do so more times than I would like to admit. She said, very quietly, "It was Stacey, wasn't it?" Not a question. I didn't answer. I held her hand tighter. She closed her eyes and said, "I wondered. I didn't want to wonder, but I did." A long pause. Then, "She has always wanted more than what she had. I thought she'd grow out of it." She didn't say anything else. I sat beside her until she fell back to sleep, and then I sat there a while longer. On day 5, Derek called me from outside the hospital, and what he'd found rearranged everything I thought I knew about how thoroughly my daughter had planned this. Derek had, through connections I will not ask him to elaborate on, obtained receipts from a health supplement retailer in Rangiora, a shop Stacey had visited on 4 separate occasions over 3 months, purchasing a specific herbal concentrate that, in the quantities being bought, had no reasonable household application. On the second visit, a store camera had logged Brendan's ute in the car park. On the 4th, Stacey had paid cash. Separately, Caroline had obtained a full record of the account withdrawals with timestamps. She had a letter from the estate planning firm confirming the appointment timeline and, crucially, confirming that someone had called their Riccarton office approximately 3 weeks before Margaret was hospitalized, identifying themselves as Margaret's personal assistant and inquiring about the progress of the restructure and whether it had been finalized. The callback number they left was Brendan's mobile. I want you to sit with that for a moment. This was a man who had bought a toxic supplement in cash to avoid a trail, who had spent 3 months carefully staging his wife's mother's deterioration to look like natural illness, and then called an estate lawyer from his own registered mobile phone to check whether the plan was still necessary. I called Derek immediately. Did he actually call from his own number? Derek said, "He did." I stared at the wall of the hospital corridor for 10 seconds. Then I said, "Derek, in 32 years of engineering, I have never once made a structural error that catastrophic." Derek said, "In 26 years of policing, neither have I." They came to the hospital on the 6th day. Together. Stacey was carrying a bunch of flowers, native blooms, the kind Margaret has always loved, which told me Stacey had thought about this visit and had made a calculation. Brendan had his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who has decided that confidence, deployed correctly, might still carry the day. I was in the corridor when they came through the door. "I had been expecting them," Stacey said. "Dad, we've been so worried. How is she?" I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at Brendan. I looked back at Stacey. "She's awake," I said. "She's talking." The doctors say she'll make a full recovery. I watched something move behind Stacey's eyes. It happened very fast, barely a flicker. It was not relief. It was the specific micro-expression of someone whose contingency plan has just expired and who is now calculating in real time what the new situation requires. Brendan said, "Sure, that's such good news, Graham. Honestly, the police are on their way," I said. Exactly like that. In the same tone, I might use to mention that the car needs a warrant. The color left Brendan's face in a way that I found, under the circumstances, almost educational. "What?" he said. "Caroline Tite filed the full brief this morning," I said. "The supplement receipts, the estate firm records, the phone call from your mobile, Brendan, to the estate lawyer, the account withdrawals, and Dr. Sharma's toxicology report. Everything. In a very organized package." Stacey made a sound that I cannot describe as anything other than a person's composure physically vacating their body. Brendan said, "Dad, Graham, just let me. There isn't a sentence." I said, "There isn't a sentence in the English language that covers this. So I need you to stop." He opened his mouth again. "The flowers are lovely," I said. "Your mother will get them from the nurse. I'll make sure she knows." They were arrested in the hospital car park 12 minutes later. Caroline had, in the manner of a woman who understands that the details matter, timed it precisely. Derek appeared beside me at the window. I genuinely don't know when he arrived. He simply materialized the way he always does when things are serious, quietly, solidly, without announcement. We stood together and watched. He said, "How are you, mate?" I thought about it properly before I answered. Like I've aged 10 years in 6 days. Like I want to sleep for a month. Like I am the saddest I have ever been about something I am also completely certain was right to do. He nodded. "And Margaret?" he said. I looked back down the corridor toward her room. Through the small window in the door, I could see the shape of her in the bed, the monitors, the light from the window beyond. "Margaret is going to be fine," I said. "She was always going to be fine. She is the most stubborn person I have ever loved, and she married me, which proves she can endure just about anything." Derek laughed. A proper laugh, the kind that echoes off corridor walls. And for just a moment, some of the weight in my chest lifted. Margaret came home on a Tuesday morning in early spring, when the light over the Port Hills had that particular clarity it gets after rain. She walked through the front door of our home, stood in the hallway, and looked around slowly. The way you look at something you came close to losing forever. Then she turned to me and said, "The hallway needs repainting." I said, "I painted it 18 months ago. It's the wrong color," she said. "It's the same color it has been since 2019. She pointed at the wall with the authority of a woman who has recently survived an attempt on her life and has emerged with her opinions entirely intact. "That," she said, "is not a color. That is what happens when someone who doesn't understand undertones buys paint without asking for help." I looked at the wall. I looked at her. I pulled out my phone and began researching painters. Stacey and Brendan faced charges of attempted murder, willful administration of a harmful substance, and obtaining financial advantage by deception. Caroline Tite prepared the case with the meticulous energy of a woman who had spent 25 years waiting for a brief this well documented. The trial ran 9 days. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When the verdict was returned, I was seated in the courtroom beside Margaret, who was holding my hand in the focused, specific way she holds things when she has decided they are not going anywhere. When it was over, she leaned toward me and said, very quietly, "I would like fish and chips." I said, "Right now?" She said, "Graham, I have been thinking about fish and chips for 6 weeks. Do not make me ask twice." So we got fish and chips. Derek came. Caroline came. Dr. Sharma came. Because Margaret had, apparently, during her recovery, charmed Dr. Sharma so completely that a social invitation was the natural outcome. We sat around a table in our garden in the early spring evening, and I watched my wife gesture emphatically while telling a story about something that had annoyed her in the hospital. A story that had nothing whatsoever to do with anything that had happened to her, just something small and ordinary that had irritated her, and I thought, there she is. There is Margaret. I said at the beginning of this that I came home to a full house, and it was the most frightening experience of my life. I take back the second part. The frightening part was not coming home. The frightening part was understanding what would have happened if I hadn't. One more day in Wellington. One more canceled meeting rescheduled. One more decision to stay an extra night and not bother anyone. And I would have come home to a house that felt empty in a way no house should ever feel. So no, I am not sorry I came home when I did. I am not sorry I walked through that door, saw what I saw, and moved the way I moved. That instinct, that quiet radar that fires before the conscious mind catches up is real, and it is worth trusting. I am sorry that my daughter became a person capable of what she did. That is a grief that does not resolve. You can carry it, and I do, but it does not go away, and I think it would be dishonest to suggest otherwise. What I have learned, and I offer this not as a lecture, but as the hard-won understanding of a 63-year-old man who thought he knew his family, is this. Love is not the same as trust, and trust must be earned and reevaluated, not assumed. The people closest to us have the most opportunity to cause harm, and proximity is not the same as safety. If someone you love is suddenly very interested in your financial arrangements, your will, your accounts, your insurance, pay attention, not with suspicion as a default, but with clear eyes and honest questions. These conversations are not comfortable. Avoid them anyway. And you may one day find yourself in a hospital corridor wondering why you never asked. And this, if your instincts speak, listen. Not to anxiety, not to paranoia, but to that specific, quiet, certain signal that something in your world has shifted without your permission. It was that signal that brought me home a day early. It was that signal, more than anything else, that saved my wife's life. I came home, I turned the lights on, and I made sure that everyone in that house faced exactly what they had done. That is all any of us can do. But it turns out, when you do it clearly and without flinching, it is enough. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to Silver Verdict and leave a comment below. It genuinely helps more than you might think. And as always, thank you for being here.